For almost all of human history, the heart was basically a black box. We knew we needed it to live, but something as simple as how blood actually moves through our bodies, that was one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in science. So today, we're going to unravel this incredible, centuries-long quest to finally understand how our blood circulates.
And to really get how big of a deal the final discovery was, you have to understand just how wrong we were for so long. We're talking more than 1,500 years where the smartest people on the planet had the completely wrong idea about something happening inside their own bodies. So, what on earth did they believe?
Well, for centuries, the truth came from ancient physicians. Their ideas about the heart and blood were treated as fact, but as we're about to see, their whole world was built on some really fascinating but totally incorrect assumptions.
Just look at how different these two columns are. It's wild. The ancients thought the liver was some kind of blood factory and that your arteries were just tubes full of air. It's a completely different reality from what we know today, that the heart is a pump and our blood just goes around and around in a big loop.
Okay, so let's break down their theory. The heart was the home of the soul, which, kind of makes emotional sense. Then they thought the liver was constantly brewing up new blood from whatever you ate. This new blood would flow out through the veins and then just get used up, absorbed by your body's tissues, gone. And the artery thing? That came from dissecting dead bodies. See, after you die, the heart stops pumping, and the arteries squeeze all the blood out into the veins, leaving them empty. So it was a perfectly logical conclusion based on the evidence they had.
But, even a theory that sticks around for 1,500 years starts to show some cracks. People started noticing little things that didn't quite add up. The first clues that something was wrong didn't come from one big aha moment, but from little observations over hundreds of years.
And the first big detective in this mystery is a Roman physician named Galen. Now, he had a pretty unique and kind of grisly advantage. He was the doctor for injured gladiators, so he got to see inside living people, and he noticed something crucial. When an artery got sliced open, it didn't hiss air, it gushed blood. Just like that, a huge piece of the old theory was proven wrong.
Galen also figured out what we now call the pulmonary transit. He realized blood had to go from the right side of the heart, through the lungs, and then back to the left side before going to the rest of the body. But here's the crazy part. That brilliant insight was mostly ignored. Meanwhile, his other ideas, including a bunch of wrong ones, were treated like the absolute truth for centuries.
And this timeline is a perfect example of how science isn't always a straight line forward. Galen's great idea just sat there lost for 1,000 years before it was rediscovered by the amazing physician Ibn al-Nafis, and then it had to be reproposed again in Europe centuries later. It just goes to show you, sometimes knowledge takes the long way around. Now, let's talk about another key piece of the puzzle, thanks to Rildo Colombo. While he was studying veins, he found these tiny little flaps, valves, and he realized they were one-way gates. This was a massive hint. If blood could only travel in one direction, it couldn't just be soaking into our tissues. It had to be going somewhere specific. It was on a one-way street. So you've got all these clues piling up. Blood in the arteries, the trip through the lungs, these one-way valves. They were all just pieces of a puzzle, waiting for someone to finally put them all together. And that someone was an English doctor named William Harvey, and his idea was going to change everything.
What made Harvey so brilliant was his method. He didn't just read the old books. He had to see for himself. He dissected all sorts of living animals. By watching the super slow beating hearts of fish and other cold-blooded creatures, he could finally see the motion clearly. It wasn't one big squeeze. The top chambers, the auricles, beat first, and then bam, the powerful bottom chambers, the ventricles, contracted right after. The heart was a two-stage pump.
But his real lightning bolt moment came when he asked a really simple question that totally destroyed the old theory. If the liver is making all this blood, and the body is just absorbing it, just how much blood are we talking about here?
And this is where Harvey's genius just takes your breath away. He did something no one had bothered to do before. He did the math. He figured out how much blood the heart could hold, multiplied it by how many times it beats, and the number he came up with was staggering. Every single hour, the heart pumps out a quantity of blood equal to 3 times a person's body weight.
And that number just made the old theory completely impossible. There is no way you could eat and drink enough to make that much blood, hour after hour. And your body couldn't absorb it all either. Your tissues would literally swell up and explode. The old model just had to be wrong.
So what was Harvey's solution? It was so beautiful and simple, and it explained everything. Circulation.
It's not new blood being made and destroyed, it's the same blood going around and around in a continuous loop with the heart acting as the engine that pushes it along.
And he proved it with this incredibly simple experiment that anyone could do. First, he'd press down on a vein in someone's arm to block the flow. Then, he'd show them how the side of the vein further from the heart would swell up with trapped blood, but the part of the vein closer to the heart would go flat and empty. The conclusion was impossible to ignore. Those one-way valves were forcing all the blood to travel in one direction only, back to the heart.
But even with all of this amazing evidence, Harvey's big idea had one major hole in it. There was one last piece of the puzzle that was missing, and his critics, rightly, kept pointing it out.
And it was a totally fair question. Look, if blood leaves the heart in arteries and comes back in veins, how does it get from one to the other? There was no visible connection between them. Harvey guessed there had to be tiny, invisible passages, but he couldn't prove they existed.
The final answer, that missing link, was right there the whole time. It was just hidden. It existed in a world that was completely invisible to the human eye. To solve this last part of the mystery, science didn't just need a new idea, it needed a whole new way of seeing.
And then, in 1661, just a few years after Harvey died, the answer finally appeared. An Italian doctor named Marcello Malpighi pointed a brand new invention, the microscope, at a frog's lung. And there they were, a beautiful, delicate network of tiny, microscopic vessels connecting the arteries directly to the veins. He called them capillaries. That was it. That was the missing link. The puzzle was finally solved.
What an incredible story, right? A story of observation, logic, and the slow, difficult work of overturning centuries of accepted ideas. And it leaves you with a pretty profound thought. If it took us over 1,500 years to figure out something as basic as our own heartbeat, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What common knowledge, what things that we think are absolute facts today will seem completely wrong to people in the future?